Hello.
Hey Nirupa, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. How's your summer going?
Summer is going well. It feels like it was just the other day that I spoke to you,
I
but
know.
it's been more than a month. As you can see, I'm actually doing a true yogi style sit down. I'm sitting on the floor as I'm speaking to you. Yeah, so actually, in fact, I want to say that today, the summer day today started with a really beautiful ritual, which is I did some sun salutations outside.
Nice.
And while I was not in the studio because I'm actually visiting a friend in Long Island,
Oh,
the beauty of being outdoors and facing the sun and doing sun salutations is actually quite something.
it's really special, isn't it?
It really is special. And then I ended the evening today with the sun in my face as the sun was setting.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I just bring that up because I know that you wrote this very beautiful piece for this exploration of the month.
Follow the sun.
Follow the sun. So, do you want to tell me a little bit about what the basis of the inspiration was for you on Follow the Sun?
Sure. One of the things that, I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell and, even his writings today, even though he's been gone and left the body for many, many years. I read his work and I'm always so inspired at some of the wisdom he brings to a lot of these ancient teachings from many different traditions, not just, yoga, but from all ancient traditions. And he talks a lot about ritual and how important ritual is to society and how ritual gives purpose to myth. And that when we act out a ritual, we actually become the myth itself. We understand the mythology. So, I think that there's a lot with all of the talk today about cultural appropriation and misappropriation of yoga. One of the most ancient rituals that we have is still the sun salutation. And it goes back to Vedic worship of Sūrya, the sun deity, and waking up every morning and doing the fire ceremony and asking for the sun's blessing, along with Prajapati, who is the architect of creation, and acknowledging that energy of how important the sun is to life itself. And we still do that ritual every time we come into a yoga studio. So we tap into something that's over 5,000 years old. We don't really know we're doing it because the problem with ritualization of anything is that if the meaning of the ritual gets lost, then it ends up very much like, the Catholic Mass in Latin, where people would know what to say, but they didn't know why they were saying it or what they were even saying. They knew how to pronounce the words, but there was no inner real connection to the ritual outside of just parroting the ritual.
It's interesting. There's two things that jump out to me. One is acting out the myth becomes mythology. I think it's just profound. Because I think that in our everyday life, I think we all are ultimately also creatures of symbol. And what I love about Joseph Campbell is also that I think he also, his writings elevate the symbolic aspect of our lives as well.
Yes.
And that the brain is symbolic and it's anthropological, right? Like a lot of what he does is also very anthropological. I want to go back to the earliest recollection of ritual for me. I grew up in India, and the earliest rituals actually were similar to what you just mentioned about the church and going for sermon, is that my mother would observe puja on certain days of the week. And as she got older, because these pujas are actually quite rigorous and you have to do a lot of things and they're long, she cut down the pujas to certain days of the month. I mean, festivals will always have a puja, both in the temple, but also in the Indian household, in the Hindu household, at least. But also there were certain rituals of when she would wake up in the morning how she would wash her hair in with coconut oil or some kind of oil, and then she would prepare herself much like what a priest would do, and then she would go before the altar and she would cook food specifically for the offering,
ritual.
For the ritual. And the offering would first be made for the gods, and then she would feed the crows, the birds, and only then can we partake of the offering.
Right.
And that was the earliest ritual. And I will also say this to you, it lacked meaning for me when I was a little child.
Right.
All I knew was that my mom woke up really early in the morning, and it didn't mean much to me.
Right.
And it was similarly going to all these temples and listening to the priest chant in Sanskrit and not entirely understanding what the words mean.
Right.
And right. So I love the chanting by itself. As a child, I was very much taken by the chanting and the sound. But my point being that something without symbolic value or meaning attribution can get lost, despite it having a very powerful place in people's lives. And in fact, I want to say, and this is so ironic that I say this, the true sense of the feeling of entering a sacred place for me hit me as I came so far away from home and did not have access to an Indian temple all the time. And I would come to the yoga studio, and you would come into the entrance, you will see that big Ganesha, that beautiful wooden statue of Ganesha, like as soon as you walked up the stairs, and then you'll have the shlokas chanting over the speakers, and then there will be the smell of incense.
Right.
And instantly, I would be transported back to my mother's.
Yes, a ritualistic space.
It's a ritualistic space.
The one thing I love about your mother's ritual, and maybe people didn't pick up on what you said that was happening. First she got up and she cooked, and so this cooking of food is nourishment, it's life sustainability. But the first offering is made to God, right? And God doesn't need any more rice. God has plenty of rice, okay? So, or whatever she cooked that day, God's got plenty of it. He actually doesn't really need it, but you make that offering to God, and God gives it back to you. But your mother, instead of taking it for herself, she turned around and she gave it to crows.
Yes.
Someone who is incapable of cooking food. And I say someone, I didn't say something, I said someone, and who probably really did appreciate that. And it was made to a being that, it's being of service. All of a sudden, her cooking the food becomes seva. It becomes a devotional act, not for herself, but for others. And then she and her family who have prosperity can partake of the food.
Yeah.
And that's so, what a deep, profound, beautiful ritual, because that's really not part of my tradition spiritually, which is Protestant, Methodist, Christianity, where you actually cook for others and then you take last. A lot of times it's very much more insular and kind of you might cook for your family, but it's not this kind of let me cook for God, then let me cook for others, then let me cook for those around me who we are already secure and have enough.
That's beautiful. Actually, what the counterpoint that you're drawing is beautiful. It also seems to me that this goes back to bhakti. The tradition of offering something unconditionally is also an act of love.
So the act of love.
Similar to, right? And similar to the way when you start your yoga class and you remind us to set an intention that is bigger than you.
Yeah.
In service, where you are expounding your energy and you're dedicating your energy and that space and that practice to something that is in need, above and beyond you. And that elevates, that elevates the moment, that elevates actually the energy of me showing up to the mat. It also elevates the energy that we share in the room together, which is why it's very special being in
collective
that space.
Collective.
Right?
Collective energy. And that is the second most important thing of any ritual, is that the energetic of the ritual, when done as a group, becomes collective energy. And I no longer am a single being on my yoga mat doing this for myself, for, my personal needs, but I actually become part of the collective, the overall, and the overall well-being of all beings. And that oneness of being is the whole purpose of yoga to begin with. And then with the movement of Surya Namaskar, when, performed with that intention, performed with Ujjayi Pranayama, when performed with, all of the elements, the uninterrupted movement, as a class, we all of a sudden become like a school of fish or a flock of birds. We're all like one in unison for just a very short amount of time, maybe 3 to 5 minutes. We're all like together. We're on the same path. We're on the same upward trajectory, trying to reach that higher intention. And that is something that's so needed today in today's world, where everything is so divisive, where we spend so much time looking for our differences, where we spend so much time talking about, the things that divide us, everything from, politics to economics to education to gender, religion. We need things that bring us together.
It's interesting. It's beautifully said. It is beautifully said also in the sense of what it takes to reach union, even if it's a very ephemeral point in time.
Yeah.
It need not be a lasting thing. It's not necessarily a levitation from my Jersey City zip code or wherever you are or wherever I am. But to me, what resonates as well is that ritual is about intentionally creating time and space. And in the creation, that intentional creation of time and space, you are actually directing your energy to be in service of something. And I want to just say that something is mundane and mechanistic. It's not even mundane or mechanistic. James and I, and James, who's a student of yours and who comes to the studio. So we have a ritual, which is our act of oneness, which is to every Thursday night or Wednesday, we will go out and it's our date night.
Right.
And listen, we have alcohol, so it's not very yogic or sattvic. But my point being,
you can have alcohol. It's not the whole bottle.
Yeah,
don't drink the whole bottle.
Yeah, but my point is that we actually are creatures of routine, but also we're ritualistic about it in that we will go to the same place down the street. We will have exactly one drink, or maybe 1.5 drinks. We will have the same ritual set of French fries. But in that moment, we actually have set aside time and space just to be with each other.
Yeah.
And it also is the act of simple conversation, some of it very humble and mundane.
Right.
But we have come together and we have set aside that time and that space. And that is connective tissue. Similarly, when you, me, and Bobby and James go to Vaibhav and we have our dosa night, that is still a union.
It's a union. It becomes
a union.
And ritual meals, that has also been throughout ancient traditions, has always been a center point of many ancient rituals. When the sacrament that's offered in the church, this is the body of Christ, this is the blood of Christ. Remember, this was all done at the Last Supper, which was a supper. It became, that idea of the sacrament comes out of a ritualistic meal that was given over Passover. So, and we've lost that too. That's a beautiful ritual, even though the exploration is not about food or eating, but the fact that people rarely, sometimes families, never sit down together and actually have a meal together at the same time, sitting at the same table without a device in their hand or without a TV on or some kind of distraction going on. And that was rituals that, like in my grandparents' house, that, you know, you would have never have thought about leaving the television on while you were having dinner. You know, grandma walked over and turned off the TV, and she let you know really quickly that it was dinner time. You know, like it was not TV time to watch television. That doesn't happen so much anymore. That doesn't happen in people's lives anymore.
It goes back to your opening quote of Joseph Campbell. What kind of a myth are you enacting, and what is the mythology of the current day life?
Right. Yeah.
Right. And the myth that we enact day in and day out, in some ways, I feel ritual in some places given way to routines, and routines almost to the point of just forces of habit.
Yes.
There are things that you're doing automatically, like there are things that, you know, there are things where the phone has sometimes become an extension of me, where I sometimes muscle memory has developed such that I might even forget when I come into the yoga studio and I'm now in the yoga class, and the instinct wants to reach out into the phone or to want to check Facebook. I'm not vilifying any of these actions. All I'm saying is what is the myth that we are enacting day in and day out, right? What do you think of that?
Well, I think that the thing about contemporary life is we keep enacting myths that connect us to the finite,
yeah,
and not the infinite. We're not looking. Many of these ancient myths that we talk about were all to help a person connect beyond the body, beyond the mind, to the divinity that was in themselves and around them. And right now we're connecting to things that are very, like, our rituals are very quick to dispose of. We don't keep them very long. And they're connected to a very pop culture sense of the world. Here today, gone tomorrow. This is hot, tomorrow it's not. And there has to be rituals in one's life that are more sustainable, that go deeper. And that doesn't mean that, you know, following the Kardashians isn't fun. If you love doing that, then do it, you know. But there should be rituals in your life that help you connect to the infinite and the eternal self instead of just the physical material self.
Or at least, I mean, from what I say is also value, something that leads to ultimately something of symbolic importance, or something of values. Something that is values oriented, right?
Something bigger than the ego.
Something bigger than the ego. To that question, and I want to go back to the yoga practice for a second. And in your exploration, you know, you've written the concept of vinyasa. And I'm just going to read just the 4 sentences. You say that we know that somewhere between 500 to 1500 CE. What is CE again?
Common era.
Common era. Okay. Tantric yoga turned the Surya Namaskar into a daily ritual, adding mantras, mudras, and adding the concept of Vinyasa krama. The Sanskrit word Vinyasa comes from the conjunction of 2 Sanskrit words, vi, meaning sequence, and nyasa, meaning to place in a conscious way, which implies that vinyasa is the conscious placement of a sequence of events. This is beautiful. Do you want to talk a little bit about this versus as well how we show up to the mat?
Yeah. So this idea of vinyasa krama is a late tantric ritualization of movement.
Yeah.
And there's been some recent, within the past 10 or 15 years, some recent research that's been done, and some tantric books have been found in Tibet. Because, you know, the British came into India and destroyed a lot of those books because they thought it was witchcraft. And a lot of them were rescued and saved and brought to Nepal, or were already in Nepal and Tibet. And so there's been some new stuff that's been uncovered about the idea of, within this movement of a Surya Namaskar, there was the uttering of mantras, and it was maybe multiple deities. It wasn't just Surya. It started with the rising sun, but then it would go to Vishnu, it would go to Shiva, it would go to Brahma, it would go to Yama, even the Lord of Death, because the Lord of Death is the southern point, right? He resides in the south. So when you did your movements around the compass, when you got to the south, you were dedicating the ritual to Yama, the Lord of Death. You were acknowledging that life begins with the rising sun and ends in the south of the land of Punt. So it could take hours to actually do all this ritual, because each point on the compass was a different deity and a different set of prayers and a different set of mudras and a different set of intentions. So that became this, and it was that uninterrupted sequence of events that became the Vinyasa Krama. As time has gone on, Vinyasa, the idea of Vinyasa was really lost. Krishnamacharya talks about it for a brief second in his book and talks about Vinyasa Krama. But even when Krishnamacharya writes his book, he's still in a position where he can't really be open about Tantra. So he's very cryptic about the Vinyasa. And then through Pattabhi Jois and Ashtanga, Pattabhi Jois really starts talking about Vinyasa Krama and this idea of the linking mechanism between one asana and the next, and how important it is to not treat the asana practice as if it's hatha yoga, where you kind of do an asana, you stop, then you putz around and you do another asana. But that there has to be this intention set, and that there has to be this linking mechanism between every asana for that intention to continue throughout the whole practice. So the practice had a higher intention. There's been many people who have claimed that, the West and its love of what we call vinyasa has really killed yoga. I'm not so sure about that. I think it's just that people don't understand the idea, the term, and the concept of vinyasa and vinyasa krama. They've interpreted it as flow, and it's not a flow. Flow is a different Sanskrit word altogether.
What is the word for flow?
I want to say it's like prahar, or I'd have to look it up. I don't have my Sanskrit dictionary, but it's not vinyasa. A lot of times vinyasa practices are not done with a higher intention. They're done with the intention to have a good time, or move, or to do this dance. And it's the intention that creates the ritualization. Without the higher intention, it's just a gratuitous movement. It could be Zumba. So in our method, in the Urban Sadhu method, there are 5 components of vinyasa. There has to be a higher intention. There's a pranayama. There is mula bandha, lifting up at the pelvic floor, waking up kundalini. Then there has to be an uninterrupted movement from one thing to the other, and where you're looking, your drishti.
I love the drishti part, by the way. I mean, just the act of, and I'm listening to all of what you're saying, and I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a novice practitioner. And I'm trying to figure out which one of these 5 are accessible. Intention, I think, is actually, frankly, if you ask me, the minute I click book a class,
right,
I've already set the intention.
You set an intention.
Right. So, I mean, that's there. And the minute I walk out of the door, if I'm coming to the studio, if I'm dialing in virtually, I've set an intention of, that's the whole thing again about creating time and space and ritual, right?
Right.
Opening my computer screen when I'm not coming into the studio. And drishti, this is so powerful. And I, of course, understand the idea of drishti. And sometimes, like, when we do an advanced, like when you do these complex jumps, and, you know, like literally, I remember my Ashtanga teacher telling me at the Shala being like, just place your drishti and your movement will follow.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, Austin, like that's the same. If you set the sight on something, if you set the vision, literally metaphorically, you have just made the first step towards like actually creating it. And I mean, having the energy go in that direction. So these two, I definitely can see that we see applications of this in our everyday life.
Yes.
What about the other three? A pranayama is an advanced practice. Would you agree?
Yes, and it's a technical breath. So it's just like, you know, so we have to look at it this way. You know, when you said your mother used to get up and she used to do these complicated pujas that took hours, and the prep took hours, and they had like tons of elements and ingredients and flowers and incense and kumkum and string and, you know, and on and food, you know. So this is technical. This is a technical thing that she learned from her mother, that learned it from her mother, that learned it from her mother. It didn't come naturally, right? She didn't just wake up one morning and say, oh, I'm going to do that puja. I remember the first time that I started conducting pujas. And when I say I started conducting pujas, meaning I would host them at the studio and I would hire a priest.
Yeah, a pujari. Yeah.
Yes, I was just hosting the puja. And the priest gave me a 3-page printout of everything I had to get. And it was like 60 items. And I was like, oh my God, you know, and and finally I got over the shock of getting the list. And I have the list now, and I know what to go get whenever I call him. So the same thing is true of Vinyasa and yoga in general. There is a technical skill to yoga, period. This is why it's not a flow. It's technical. And over time, you learn how to incorporate the pranayama. You learn how to incorporate the mula bandha. You remember the pranayama. You remember the mula bandha while you're doing the movement. You learn the dristis, and you learn to tap into the internal timing of the metronome, which you have already,
of the breath
to determine the outcome of the movement, the ending and the beginning of the movement, and the linking mechanism to the movement. There's two people who can break the vinyasa in a yoga class. One is the teacher. If you're trying to teach a vinyasa, it also may mean that the teacher needs to stick within the pranayama, the metronome of the pranayama, and not over talk or not over give directions or not, you know, break the rhythm of the meditative movement. Mm-hmm. If you break it, then you break the student's trance-like state of the mind. Mm. The vinyasa should take you into a state of mind where you're in a subtle trance, that you're connecting to higher consciousness while in movement. The second is the student. The student can break the vinyasa by having the eyes dart all over the place, having the mind wander, thinking about things that are not the breath and the mula bandha, and thinking about like, you know, I got to go get like some orange juice after I'm out of class today, and thinking about mundane things. So,
but Austin, I will say this, and I've been that student many a times, not with my drishti.
We all have.
We all have. I mean, like, because we bring a lot to the studio. And in fact, going back to the poppiness and the ephemeral aspect of the lives that we lead, we are being bombarded with so much stimuli before we come into a studio that it almost probably takes, every individual varies, but it probably takes you a certain amount of time to decompress and even be there. Yeah, right. Sure. But what I want to say, though, is despite the fleeting nature of the mind, which it almost always is, what I love about what you mentioned about the metronome is by creating that cadence of that guttural breath, that ujjayi breath. Sometimes when I'm having a hard time focusing, I almost will go into ujjayi, even though I'm not in a yoga class, because it's that sonic validation. Right. It is resetting a metronome. And I remember in the Mysore Ashtanga practice, they talk about the equally spaced inhalation and the equally spaced exhalation.
Yes.
It's not easy.
It's
not easy, but to your point, like these are training rituals, or these are training mechanisms by which you're creating space for the mind despite its fleeting nature to be in that space in the room. And this goes back again to the beauty of unity, which is the power of so many bodies in the room, the power of so many bodies breathing in that similar rhythm. Even if you are off track, the energy brings you back into the room.
The energy brings you back. And it also becomes the last thing that what it does, it also helps us understand time, or kala. Kali is the female form of time. Kala, Shiva as Kalabhadava is the male energy of time. I mean, I know I'm not, but that's a binary understanding of the two, but they're two gods that are a god and a goddess is named after forms of time. And time is the most frightening thing of all. Like, right, both Kalabhadava and Mahakali are very fierce deities that look very frightening, because finally time is the Grim Reaper. But if the yogi learns to control time,
or transcend
it, and when I say they learn to control it, they learn to understand it. Time doesn't control them, they're controlling time. So that idea of breathing and moving with the breath and descending with the exhales is an understanding of the metronome of time.
Oh, how beautiful.
That time isn't working against me, it's working with me now.
Yeah, and you are actually a vessel flowing through time, actually.
So when you talk about this idea of us being bombarded with information, of us always being rushed in modern society, of us being feeling like we don't have enough time, the vinyasa, even if it's just a simple sun salutation that you do every day, should be a moment where you feel in unity with time, that you can transcend the oppression of time.
Oh, how beautiful. That is profound.
That's the real meaning of the vinyasa. And so that's why it's really important that Western yogis stop calling it a flow. Because that flow is when you are caught up in the current and the current takes you where it wants to go. You don't have any control of the current. In a vinyasa, you're in control of the destination that you're going to. You have already set it with the higher intention.
And also I would like to think of it one more way, which is that you become one with the journey as well.
That this journey's not sucking you into it, and you're, flowing down
practice. You become one with the
yes.
You become one with the practice as you're flowing from one sequence to the next. You become one with the practice, and as a result of which, actually, I see it as a collapsing of the destination and the practice. It just becomes like one never-ending thing. I mean, that's I think that those yoga classes where you're sort of like in that magical space where you've lost all sense of time. The body is so connected with the breath.
Right.
you've been there. I mean, you talked about the trance, right?
Yes.
And those moments is where you basically transcended the zip code of where you're practicing to. You are there, but you're not there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is profound. This is profound.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
so I mean, so this is like, so for ritual, and if you want to, it would be nice to end with the shloka of Follow the Sun. Would you like to?
I don't have it in front of me. Would you like to?
I do, and I hope I'm saying this right. And it's so it's the shloka is from the Agnihotra ceremony, or the sunrise prayer. Om Suryaya Swaha, Suryaya Idam Namama, Prajapate Swaha, Pajapate Idam Namama. I think it's Idam Namama. I think I'm reading the English spelling, and I'm sorry, I don't have the Sanskrit one in front of me, but the meaning is, I offer this oblation to the sun and the Lord of creation. This offering is not for my benefit alone, but for the welfare of all. So, yeah. Austin.
So, I mean, I want to like one more little key to open up the mystery of all this is Prajapati is seen as the Lord of creation, and it's different myth systems. So, once creation happens, creation is kind of unorganized. Mm-hmm. Prajapati is seen as an architect. He's a little guy with a lot of tools, hammers, sickles, right angles, nails, and he organizes creation in a way that it's understandable to us. So Prajapati brings rationality, a rational element to the chaos of creation. Vinyasa and the ritual of the Vinyasa and the sun salutation is a rational idea of creation.
Beautiful. To the ritualistic showing up to the studio or wherever you are, to engage with the rational idea of creation and to transcend time. What a noble goal.
A noble goal. Thank you, Nirupa. It's always beautiful talking to you.
Always beautiful talking to you. Thank you, Austin.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.